The marble lobby of Orient Tower gleamed beneath the crystal chandeliers, a palace of power where every polished surface whispered wealth. In that world of suits and silk ties, Ethan Cole was invisible. Just the janitor. Just the man pushing a mop bucket past shoes that cost more than his monthly paycheck. At least, that's what they all believed. Victor Harland, the CEO, spotted him near the top floor elevator. "Not up here," Victor barked, his voice carrying for the board members at his side. "This floor is for executives. Keep the staff where they belong." Laughter followed, sharp and cruel, as the elevator doors closed in Ethan's face. The humiliation was swift, public, complete. But Ethan didn't flinch. He turned away calmly, as if nothing had been lost. 10 minutes later, though, the tower itself would shake with revelation. The man they mocked, the janitor they barred from the CEO's office, was about to buy the very building they worshipped. And when the truth landed, their laughter would die, leaving only awe and silence. Ethan Cole wheeled his mop bucket into the quiet morning corridors of Orient Tower. He had worked here long enough to know the rhythms, the secretaries rushing in with coffee trays, the analysts glued to their phones, the executives striding like gods through glass corridors. To them, he was background noise. A polite nod at best, a dismissive glance at worst. That was fine with Ethan. Being invisible had its advantages. But invisibility ended the moment he pressed the call button for the executive elevator. The doors slid open, revealing Victor Harland and his entourage of board members fresh from a strategy meeting. The CEO's presence filled the space before his voice even sounded. Victor's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning, sir," Ethan answered simply. His uniform was plain, a little worn at the knees, but pressed with quiet pride. Victor stepped forward, lips curling into a disdainful smile. "Not up here, you don't. The top floor is reserved for those who belong here. Executives. Decision makers. Not." He let the word hang, letting his gaze travel deliberately from mop to bucket to Ethan's withered face. "Custodians." The board members chuckled, some trying to hide it behind their hands, others bold enough to laugh outright. One whispered loudly enough for Ethan to hear, "Probably thinks he can mop his way into the boardroom." The sting wasn't in the words, it was in the intent. They weren't just drawing a line, they were reminding him, and everyone else, of his supposed place. "I'll take the service elevator, then," Ethan said softly, turning his mop handle with deliberate calm. His eyes met Victor's just long enough to register that calm, and it unsettled the CEO more than defiance would have. Victor waved him off with a smirk. "Remember your place. Some doors aren't meant for you." The elevator doors closed, sealing Ethan out as laughter echoed inside. Word traveled quickly. By the time Ethan returned to the lobby, the humiliation had already grown legs. 2 junior analysts smirked as he passed. A receptionist whispered to another, "Did you hear?" The janitor tried to use the exec elevator. By noon, the story had become theater. Executives reenacted it with exaggerated gestures, mop in hand, shoulders slumped, mocking Ethan's attempt to step out of line. One particularly arrogant manager cornered him near the break room. "Hey, Ethan. Hear you tried to join the board this morning. Maybe next time wear a suit, yeah?" Laughter roared from the group behind him. Ethan only smiled faintly and pushed his bucket forward. Their words slid off him, not because they didn't sting, but because he knew something they didn't. For years, he had been dismissed as a shadow, and for years he had studied markets, companies, opportunities, quietly, methodically. While they mocked, he invested. While they strutted through polished corridors, he built an empire in silence. Still, the mockery escalated. That afternoon, Victor himself told the story again during a lunch with visiting investors. "You should have seen it," he boomed. "The janitor, thinking he could ride with us to the top. I had to remind him, everyone has a place. And his is with a mop, not in a boardroom." The investors laughed along, some uncomfortably, others with relish. Ethan, unseen in the corner collecting used dishes, caught every word. The humiliation had reached its peak. Ethan was no longer just invisible, he had been dragged into the spotlight, only to be paraded as the day's entertainment. And that was when Victor made the fatal mistake. He leaned back in his chair, savoring his wine, and said, "This building, this tower, is a symbol. It separates those who matter from those who don't. Some people will never belong here. And it's better they remember that." The words carried across the dining hall, landing like a hammer. Guests nodded, some smug, others indifferent. But Ethan, standing with his tray, felt the shift. It was no longer about an elevator. It was about being barred from belonging at all. About being branded permanently lesser. Ethan placed the tray down gently, nodded once, and walked away. The challenge had been issued, even if Victor hadn't realized it. And Ethan had no intention of letting it pass. 10 minutes from now, the same tower that had mocked him would hear the truth, and the balance of power would never be the same. Did you catch how quickly humiliation spreads? One moment, Ethan was simply doing his job, and the next he was the punchline for an entire tower full of executives. That's how arrogance works. It multiplies fast, and it feeds on underestimating the quiet ones. But here's the thing, those are exactly the people who end up turning the tables. If you want more stories where underdogs rise from the shadows and flip the script on power, hit that subscribe button now. Don't miss the next twist, because the best victories always come from the most unexpected places. The boardroom fell into a hush as Ethan stepped inside, his work shirt still bearing the faint streaks of polish from the lobby floor. The executives, who had mocked him not even half an hour earlier, now stared in disbelief. Their eyes darted between him and the portfolio tucked under his arm, as though refusing to believe what their minds already knew. The janitor had somehow become the man in control. The CEO, tall and sharp-suited, leaned back in his leather chair, trying to maintain authority. "You have 5 minutes to explain what you think you're doing here," he said, voice cold. Ethan set the portfolio down on the gleaming oak table. He opened it slowly, page after page revealing signed documents, wire confirmations, and acquisition terms. "I don't need 5 minutes," he replied softly. "I only need one. This building, your headquarters, is now mine." A ripple of shock moved through the room. One woman gasped audibly, another executive let out a strained laugh that quickly died in his throat. The CEO's jaw tightened, his carefully constructed facade cracking. "That's impossible. You're bluffing." Ethan shook his head. "I've been preparing this for years. Every night after work, while you mocked the quiet janitor, I was studying markets, watching real estate collapses, waiting for the right time to buy. And when your debt finally outweighed your assets," he tapped the final page. "I was ready." The silence that followed was thunderous. No one moved. The janitor, dismissed as invisible just minutes ago, now held every ounce of power in the tower. The CEO stood abruptly, slamming his hand on the table. "Even if you did manage this little stunt, you don't know the first thing about running a corporation." His voice carried both rage and desperation. Owning a building isn't the same as owning respect. Ethan's calm never wavered. He leaned forward, meeting the man's glare. "Respect isn't bought with a suit or an office. It's earned. And right now, every person in this room knows who earned it." The words cut deep, and for a long moment, no one dared to interrupt. But then, from the back of the room, a figure cleared his throat, a property magnate whose opinion carried weight in the city. He had been invited as an observer for the board meeting, and his voice carried authority. "I've reviewed the transfer documents myself," he said. "They are airtight. Ethan owns this building outright. If anyone doubts his legitimacy, they're doubting the law." Gasps filled the room once more. The magnate's validation was the final nail. The CEO's shoulders slumped slightly, though his eyes still burned with prideful fury. "You'll regret this," the CEO muttered, though it sounded more like a plea than a threat. Ethan straightened, his voice steady. "Maybe. But I'll never regret standing up to arrogance." The room erupted into tension. Some executives began whispering frantically, pulling out phones to check news feeds and financial alerts. Already, headlines were surfacing online: Janitor buys Orient Tower. The shock spread like wildfire through social media, and each notification that buzzed on their phones only drove home the reality: their world had shifted permanently. One board member, a man who had sneered the loudest earlier, leaned forward and tried to mask desperation with flattery. "Mr. Cole, perhaps we started off on the wrong foot. You've clearly demonstrated vision. Maybe we could discuss a partnership?" His words dripped with insincerity. Ethan studied him for a long moment. "Partnerships require trust. And you showed me none." The man's face reddened, and he sank back into his chair. Another executive, younger and less polished, spoke up nervously. If you're the owner now, what happens to us?" His voice cracked with uncertainty. Ethan let the question hang for a moment, watching the unease ripple through the room. "That depends. Some of you may finally learn what humility feels like. Others may not like the changes to come." His tone wasn't cruel, but it was firm, resolute. The CEO wasn't done. He circled the table like a predator searching for weakness. "Listen to yourselves," he barked at his team. "You're cowering before a janitor. He may own bricks and glass, but he doesn't own us." His hand swept dramatically toward Ethan. "This is a circus act. Don't let him humiliate us." But the words landed flat. Too many eyes were fixed on Ethan now, searching for a steady hand in the storm. The janitor, who had always been invisible, now radiated an authority that no title could grant. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You're right about one thing, Victor. I don't own you. You're free to leave. But the doors you walk out of now belong to me. And when your contracts are renegotiated, it will be on my terms." The CEO froze, rage boiling beneath his skin. For the first time, he looked small, just another man fighting to protect his crumbling illusion of power. From the side of the room, the property magnate spoke again. "I've seen men rise and fall in this city. What Ethan has done today isn't just impressive, it's historic. It's a reminder that power doesn't always wear a suit." He turned to the executives. "You'd be wise to remember that." The weight of those words pressed heavily on everyone. Even the CEO faltered, his jaw working wordlessly. The applause began timidly, 1, 2 claps from the younger executive, and then spread like wildfire. Reluctant at first, then stronger, until the entire boardroom was filled with the thunderous sound of hands coming together. Ethan stood at the center, not basking in it, not raising his arms in triumph. He simply stood still, his posture calm, his expression composed. He had nothing to prove. The truth of his victory spoke for itself. The applause thundered on, echoing against glass and steel, until it seemed the entire tower vibrated with the sound. Outside, the skyline of the city glimmered in the fading afternoon light, a witness to the impossible transformation, a janitor who had bought the fortress of the elite. The CEO sank into his chair, silent now, his authority shattered. The same men and women who once laughed at Ethan now clapped for him, their arrogance crumbling under the weight of his triumph. And in that moment, Ethan Cole, the man they had barred from stepping onto this floor, stood taller than anyone else in Orient Tower. The silence after the applause lingered in the boardroom like a held breath. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, unmoved by the praise or the shifting glances of the people who had mocked him just minutes earlier. For him, victory was never about applause, it was about principle. Still, the moment had weight. He had been the shadow in the corner, invisible, underestimated, and now he stood at the center, steady and unshakable. The CEO, Victor Harland, sank back into his leather chair. His once commanding posture was gone, replaced by a slouch that betrayed defeat. The arrogance that had defined him now looked fragile, almost pitiful. He fumbled for words, his voice stripped of confidence. You'll destroy this company," he muttered, though even he didn't seem to believe it. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth hung heavy in the air. It wasn't him who had endangered the tower, but Victor's arrogance, his reckless debt, and his blind belief in invulnerability. The board knew it. The staff outside the glass walls knew it. And Victor himself knew it. One by one, the executives filed out of the room, whispering amongst themselves, their footsteps hushed as though they were leaving a funeral. A funeral, perhaps, for the old order they had clung to. Some avoided Ethan's gaze, ashamed. Others lingered just long enough to nod in quiet acknowledgement, the beginnings of respect shining through their discomfort. The boardroom emptied until only Ethan and Victor remained. The CEO refused to meet his eyes, his pride refusing to let him acknowledge the man he had mocked. Ethan walked toward the window, looking out at the sprawl of the city beneath him. The skyline glowed with possibility, and for a moment, he let himself breathe it in. Then he spoke, not turning back. Power is temporary, Victor. So is humiliation. But dignity? That stays with you, or it doesn't. That choice was always yours. With that, Ethan left him there, alone in his glass fortress, staring into the reflection of his own downfall. Word of what happened spread like lightning. By the end of the day, everyone in Orion Tower had heard, the janitor had bought the building, and the CEO who barred him from the top floor had been stripped of his throne. In the cafeteria, whispers turned into stories, stories into legends. Employees who had once walked past Ethan without a second glance now spoke his name with awe. For some, it was validation, for others, a bitter reminder that status was never guaranteed. Justice began to unfold quickly. Victor Harland, already drowning in debt, faced investigations into his financial dealings. The empire he had built on intimidation and appearances crumbled, leaving him not as a titan but as a cautionary tale. The executives who had jeered and laughed at Ethan found themselves under scrutiny too. Some lost their seats at the table, their reputations tarnished by their complicity in Harland's arrogance. For them, humiliation was no longer a passing moment, it was permanent. And Ethan? He never sought revenge. He didn't fire the janitors, the assistants, or the clerks. In fact, he quietly raised their wages. To him, they had never been invisible. He knew their long hours, their uncelebrated labor, their sacrifices. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, diminished, and he would not become another man who perpetuated it. He walked the halls of the building not as a conqueror but as a guardian. When employees tried to treat him differently, with nervous deference, he would smile and remind them, "I'm still Ethan." He declined lavish offices, choosing instead a modest workspace on a lower floor. He never traded his worn work shoes for Italian leather. To him, authenticity mattered more than appearances. The city's media clamored for interviews, desperate to turn him into a celebrity. Ethan granted only one, standing in front of the building with his mop still leaning against the wall behind him. "I didn't buy this place to prove a point," he told the cameras. "I did it because people like me deserve to stand tall. Everyone deserves to be seen." Those words echoed beyond the city. They became a rallying cry for underdogs everywhere. Social media buzzed with clips of the moment the janitor walked into the boardroom, memes of him standing calmly before the furious CEO, and headlines that turned him into both legend and symbol. But when the lights dimmed, when the journalists stopped calling, Ethan returned to what he valued most, his life, lived quietly, with integrity. He didn't need to sit in the tallest office or dine at the fanciest restaurants. He found contentment in walking home the same streets, greeting the same neighbors, and knowing deep down that his worth had never been measured in wealth or titles. On evenings, he would sometimes pause outside Orion Tower, looking up at its glittering windows. People inside still worked late into the night, chasing power, chasing validation. But Ethan had already learned the secret they hadn't. Real strength wasn't in ownership, or applause, or dominance. It was in remaining true to yourself, no matter how the world tried to define you. And so the janitor who once pushed a mop across marble floors, barred from the CEO's office, walked away not just as the man who bought the building, but as someone who proved that dignity doesn't come from permission, it comes from within. And that's how the janitor who was barred from the CEO's office didn't just step inside, he bought the whole building. A story of dignity, justice, and quiet strength. Because the truth is, the world often underestimates the ones who work in silence, until silence becomes the loudest victory of all. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, only to surprise everyone? Share your story in the comments. Let's build a community where underdogs stand tall together. And if this story resonated with you, make sure to follow this channel for more tales of resilience, triumph, and unexpected heroes.